I'm not the type of person who believes in monsters or creatures that go bump in the night. I've always been skeptical of those kinds of stories. But one night, I had an encounter that changed everything. It was a summer evening, and I was camping in a remote area in the woods. I had set up my tent and was starting to relax when I heard something outside. It sounded like rustling in the bushes, but I didn't think much of it at first. As the night went on, the rustling became louder and more frequent. I started to feel uneasy, but I tried to convince myself that it was just an animal. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a person. It was tall and lanky, with long limbs and one enormous eye that seemed to glow in the darkness. But as it got closer, I realized that it was no human. It was a Gigopler. The Gigopler was unlike anything I had ever seen before. Its skin was pale and almost translucent, and it moved in a way that was unnatural. It seemed to glide over the ground, its long limbs stretching out with each step. I tried to move, but I was frozen in fear. I watched as it came closer and closer, its enormous eye fixed on me. Suddenly, it stopped. It tilted its head to one side, and I could see its mouth open in a grotesque grin. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew I had to get out of there. I slowly started to back away, but the Gigopler didn't move. It just stood there, watching me with its enormous eye. I don't know how I managed to get away, but somehow I did. I ran back to my car and drove as fast as I could out of there. When I got back to civilization, I tried to tell people what had happened, but no one believed me. They thought I was crazy or that I had just imagined it. But I know what I saw that night. And I know that the Gigopler is real. I don't know what the Gigopler wanted from me, or why it chose to reveal itself to me. But I do know one thing for sure. I'll never forget that night, and I'll never go back to that remote area in the woods again. Because I know that the Gigopler is out there, waiting for its next victim. I'm not one to easily believe in supernatural creatures. But after what I experienced last winter, I can no longer deny the existence of Wendigos. It was a typical winter day in the northern woods of Canada, and I was on a solo camping trip. I had been hiking for hours and decided to set up my tent near a frozen river, hoping to catch some fish for dinner. As the sun began to set, I started a fire and started cooking the fish I caught. I remember feeling content and at peace with nature. That feeling didn't last long. As I was cleaning up after dinner, I heard a faint noise in the distance. It sounded like someone crying. Being in the wilderness, I assumed it was an animal, but as the noise grew louder, I realized it was coming from a human. It was a woman's cry, a desperate plea for help. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking towards the sound, thinking someone might be injured or lost. The cry led me to a small clearing, and there, I saw her. A woman was sitting on the ground, hugging her knees and sobbing uncontrollably. She was dressed in a torn and bloody coat, and her face was pale, almost white. I immediately approached her, asking if she was okay, but she didn't respond. Instead, she just kept crying and shaking. I tried to calm her down, but it was no use. Suddenly, she stopped crying and looked up at me with her hollow, sunken eyes. That's when I saw it. Her teeth had grown longer, and her hands had turned into claws. I backed away, realizing that this woman wasn't human. It was a Wendigo, a creature that is said to possess humans who resort to cannibalism in order to survive. I ran back to my tent as fast as I could, hoping that the Wendigo wouldn't follow me. But I could hear her howling in the distance, getting closer and closer. I barricaded myself inside my tent and prayed that it would be strong enough to keep me safe. The night was long and terrifying. I could hear the Wendigo scratching at the sides of my tent, and its howls echoed through the woods. It wasn't until dawn broke that the Wendigo finally retreated. I waited a while longer before leaving my tent, and when I did, I saw the footprints of the creature all around my campsite. I knew I had to leave the woods as soon as possible, so I packed up my gear and left. I haven't gone camping since that night, and I doubt I ever will. The memory of the Wendigo still haunts me, and I can't help but wonder if there are more out there, lurking in the woods, waiting to possess their next victim. I remember that night like it was yesterday. It was a warm summer evening and I had decided to take a walk on a nearby nature trail to clear my head. I had been walking for about an hour when I started to feel uneasy, like someone was watching me. I tried to shake it off and told myself I was being paranoid. That was until I heard something rustling in the bushes behind me. I turned around to see a figure emerging from the trees. At first, I thought it was just a person, but as it got closer, I realized it was something else entirely. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, and its limbs twisted and contorted in ways that no humans could. I could see that it was covered in fur and its face was twisted into a grotesque snarl. I was frozen in fear, unable to move or even scream. The creature took a step towards me, and that's when I saw its hands. They were long and slender, with fingers that ended in sharp claws. I knew then that I was looking at a skinwalker, a creature of Native American legend that was said to be able to transform into any animal it desired. I tried to run, but my legs felt heavy and uncooperative. I stumbled and fell, and the skinwalker was suddenly upon me. Its claws were inches from my face, and I could feel its hot breath on my skin. I closed my eyes and braced myself for the worst, but then I heard a loud crack. When I opened my eyes, the skinwalker was gone, and there was a man standing over me. He was dressed in traditional Native American clothing and had a look of concern on his face. He helped me up and asked if I was okay. I was in shock, and it took me a moment to process what had just happened. The man explained to me that he had been following me for a while, watching out for me. He had seen the skinwalker and had managed to distract it long enough for me to get away. He told me that skinwalkers were real and that they were dangerous, but he assured me that he would protect me. We walked back to my car in silence, and I could feel his eyes on me the whole way. I never saw the skinwalker again, but I knew that I had been lucky. From that day forward, I never took a walk alone at night, and I always kept an eye out for the man in traditional clothing who had saved my life. I don't know what made me go camping in the remote forest that day, but I sure do regret it now. I've always been an avid camper, but this trip was different. I had a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach, like something was off. I should have listened to my instincts. It was getting dark when I set up my tent and started a small fire. I was roasting some marshmallows when I heard a strange noise. It was like a low growl, but different. It was more guttural and sounded like it was coming from something bigger than an animal. I tried to shrug it off, thinking it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again, closer this time. I quickly put out the fire and climbed into my tent, zipping it up tight. I tried to calm myself down, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. I listened intently for any sounds outside, but all I could hear was the rustling of the trees. That's when I saw it. A one-eyed creature, towering over my tent. Its fur was matted and dirty, and its one eye was fixed on me. I couldn't move, couldn't even scream. I was paralyzed with fear. It let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the forest. I knew then that I was in real danger. I had heard of Gigoplers before, but I never thought I would actually see one. I don't know how long it was there, watching me. It felt like hours, but it was probably only minutes. Finally, it turned and disappeared back into the forest. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that one-eyed monster staring at me. When the sun finally rose, I packed up my things and got out of there as fast as I could. I don't know if anyone will believe my story, but I know what I saw. I'll never forget that night in the woods, and I'll never go camping alone again. I'm not sure if what I saw was real or just my imagination playing tricks on me, but I feel like I have to tell someone. Maybe if I talk about it, I can finally shake off this feeling of dread that's been haunting me ever since that night. It all started when a few friends and I decided to go camping in the deep woods of northern Michigan. We've been planning this trip for months, and we were excited to finally get away from the city and all its noise. We set up our tents near a small lake, and everything was going great. We fished, hiked, and sat around the campfire telling ghost stories. But on the second night, something happened that made me question whether we were alone in the woods. I was lying in my tent, trying to fall asleep, when I heard a strange noise outside. It sounded like something was scratching against the tent fabric. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon or a bear. But then the scratching turned into a low growl, and I knew it was something else entirely. I tried to calm myself down, thinking that it was probably just a wild animal passing through. But then I heard footsteps circling around our campsite. They were heavy and uneven, like someone or something was walking on two legs. I woke up my friends, and we huddled together in one tent, listening to the footsteps get closer and closer. It was then that I caught a glimpse of something moving in the darkness. It was tall and thin, with antlers on its head and glowing eyes. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, to get as far away from that thing as possible, but my legs wouldn't move. We just sat there, frozen in terror, as the creature circled our campsite, growling and snarling. Eventually, it left, disappearing back into the woods. We packed up our campsite the next morning and left as quickly as possible, never speaking of what happened that night again. But I can't forget about it. Every time I close my eyes, I see that creature, the Wendigo, staring back at me with its glowing eyes. And even though I made it out alive, I can't help but wonder if I'll ever be able to shake off the feeling of dread that's been haunting me ever since that night. I was hiking in the remote woods of Arizona when I first saw it. A skinwalker. At first, I thought it was just a coyote or a large dog. But as it got closer, I could see that it wasn't an animal at all. It was standing on two legs and its body was eerily humanoid. It was covered in matted fur, and its eyes glowed a bright yellow in the moonlight. I froze in terror as it approached me, its razor-sharp claws clicking against the rocks. I could feel its hot breath on my face as it leaned in, and I thought for sure that it was going to attack me. But instead, it just stared at me with those glowing eyes, almost as if it was studying me. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in fear, but eventually, the skinwalker turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. I stumbled my way back to my campsite, my heart racing and my mind reeling. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. The next day, I tried to brush it off as just my imagination, but deep down, I knew that what I had seen was real. And as the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle in the bushes, every howl of a coyote, made me jump. I was constantly on edge, and I knew that the skinwalker was out there, somewhere. I never saw it again, but I could feel its presence all around me. And even now, years later, I can still hear the sound of its claws clicking against the rocks, and see those glowing yellow eyes staring back at me. I never thought I'd see something so terrifying in my life, but I did. It was a hot summer night, and I was out camping with a few of my friends in a remote forest in the mountains. We were telling ghost stories and roasting marshmallows when we heard a strange noise coming from the woods. At first, we thought it was just an animal, but the noise kept getting louder and louder. That's when we saw it, a gigopler. It was huge, standing on two legs, with matted fur and a single glowing red eye. It was staring at us, and we were frozen in fear. The gigopler started to move towards us, and we could hear its heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. We knew we had to get out of there, but we were too scared to move. Suddenly, one of my friends screamed, and the gigopler lunged towards us. We ran as fast as we could, but the gigopler was faster. It chased us through the forest, and we could hear its horrible growls and snarls getting closer and closer. I could feel its hot breath on the back of my neck, and I thought I was going to die. But somehow, we managed to outrun it. We stumbled out of the forest and into the safety of our car. We drove away as fast as we could, and I'll never forget the sight of the gigopler disappearing into the darkness. I don't know what that thing was or why it was chasing us, but I know one thing for sure: I never want to see a gigopler again. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal, so when I heard about the gigopler sighting in a nearby forest, I couldn't resist the urge to investigate. Armed with my trusty flashlight and a hunting knife, I made my way into the woods just as the sun was setting. The air was still, and the only sound was the crunching of leaves beneath my feet. As I ventured deeper into the forest, I began to feel uneasy. It was as though something was watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I shrugged it off, knowing that it was just my overactive imagination getting the best of me. But then, I saw it. At first, I thought it was a deer, but as it got closer, I realized that it was anything but. It was a gigopler, with one eye staring right at me. I froze in terror as the creature lunged at me, its sharp claws reaching for my throat. In that moment, I knew I had to fight back or be killed. With all the strength I could muster, I swung my knife at the creature, hoping to hit its eye. But the gigopler was too fast, dodging my attacks with ease. We circled each other, each waiting for the other to make the first move. It was a battle of wits, and I knew that I was no match for this creature. But just as I was about to give up hope, the gigopler suddenly turned and fled back into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. I stood there, shaking and panting, realizing just how lucky I was to still be alive. From that day on, I made a promise to myself to never underestimate the power of the paranormal, and to always be prepared for whatever may come my way. I remember the day I saw it like it was yesterday. It was a chilly November evening, and I was driving home from a weekend trip to my cabin in the woods. The sun had set early, and darkness had settled in. I had been on this road 100 times, but tonight something felt different. The woods around me were eerily quiet, no rustling of leaves or chirping of birds. As I turned a corner, my headlights illuminated a figure in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes and squinted, trying to make out what it was. At first, I thought it was a deer or a bear, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized it was something else entirely. It was tall, impossibly thin, with matted fur and razor-sharp claws. Its eyes glowed a bright yellow, and it had antlers that looked like they were made of bone. It was a Wendigo, a creature I had only heard about in stories and legends. My heart racing, I tried to back up, but the Wendigo was too quick. It lunged at my car, and I felt its claws scrape against the metal. I slammed on the gas, desperate to get away. The creature chased after me, its eyes fixed on me the whole time. I drove as fast as I could, praying that I wouldn't crash. The Wendigo was relentless, and it seemed like it was gaining on me. I could hear its eerie howling, and I knew I was in serious danger. But then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the Wendigo vanished. One moment it was right behind me, and the next it was gone. I pulled over and caught my breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I made it home safely that night, but I never forgot what I saw. To this day, I can't explain it. Was it a trick of the light, or was it something truly otherworldly? All I know is that I never want to see a Wendigo again. I never believed in the paranormal until the night I saw a skinwalker. It was late, and I was driving home from a friend's house. I live in a small town in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by woods and hills. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and nothing ever happens. But that night was different. As I was driving down the dark, deserted road, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was a figure, walking on two legs, but something about it was off. It was too tall, too thin, and its movements were jerky and unnatural. I slowed down, trying to get a better look. As I got closer, I could see that it was covered in fur, with long, pointed ears and glowing eyes. It looked like a wolf, but it was standing upright like a person. And then it turned to look at me. That's when I knew it wasn't a wolf. It was a skinwalker. For those who don't know, skinwalkers are creatures from Navajo folklore. They're said to be witches who can transform into animals and possess supernatural powers. Some people believe they're real, and that they can bring harm to those who see them. I was frozen in fear as the skinwalker stared at me. Its eyes seemed to glow brighter, and I could feel its gaze piercing through me. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, it turned and ran off into the woods. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle in the bushes, made my heart race. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. Was it real? Was it just my imagination? I didn't know. The next morning, I went to the local diner for breakfast. As I was sitting there, still trying to process what had happened, I overheard a group of locals talking. They were saying that something had been killing their livestock at night, tearing them apart like they were nothing. That's when I knew. The skinwalker was real, and it was out there, hunting. I've never seen it again, but I know it's still out there, waiting in the shadows. And I'll never forget the terror I felt that night.